The blizzard hit Montana's Glacier National Park with a violence that veteran ranger Sarah Chen hadn't seen in her 8 years patrolling these mountains. Wind screamed through the valleys at 70 miles per hour, driving snow so thick it turned the world into a white chaos where sky and ground became one. Visibility dropped to less than 3 feet. The temperature plunged to 18 below zero, and with the wind chill, it felt closer to 40 below. Sarah should have turned back 2 hours ago. That's what protocol demanded. That's what her training screamed at her. But somewhere out here in this frozen hell, according to the garbled satellite phone call she'd received at 3:47 p.m., a family of 4 was stranded. Their SUV had slid off the backcountry access road near Cathedral Peak. 2 adults, 2 children, one of them an infant. The call had cut out before she got exact coordinates. So Sarah Chen kept moving forward into the storm, her snowshoes sinking 8 inches with each step, her GPS unit clutched in one frozen hand, searching for any sign of the vehicle. Her radio had stopped working 30 minutes ago. Ice had probably gotten into the circuits. She was alone out here, completely cut off, with darkness falling fast. Before we continue with Sarah's story, we want to invite you to hit that subscribe button and drop a like on this video. Also, tell us in the comments what time it is where you're watching from and what city you're in. Your support helps us share more incredible stories like this one. Now, let's get back to Sarah. Sarah's father had been a ranger too. Michael Chen had worked these same mountains for 33 years before a heart attack took him 5 years ago. He taught Sarah everything: how to read weather patterns in the clouds, how to navigate by the stars when technology failed, how to survive when survival seemed impossible. And he taught her the most important lesson of all: you never, ever abandon someone who needs help. Not ever. That's why she was out here now, when every rational part of her brain was screaming at her to find shelter. The wind hammered against her, trying to knock her down. Snow caked her goggles, forcing her to stop every few minutes to scrape them clean. Her face mask was frozen solid with her breath. Her fingers inside her thermal gloves had gone numb an hour ago. She checked her GPS again, squinting at the screen. According to the last known coordinates from the phone call, the vehicle should be somewhere within a half-mile radius. But in these conditions, she could walk within 20 feet of it and never see it. That's when Sarah made her first mistake. She stepped forward, and the ground wasn't there. The hidden ravine opened beneath her like a mouth. Sarah dropped 12 feet straight down, her scream swallowed by the howling wind. She hit hard, her left leg buckling at an unnatural angle. The sound of her femur snapping was lost in the storm, but she felt it. A white-hot spike of agony that shot from her hip to her knee had exploded behind her eyes. She landed in a snowdrift at the bottom of the ravine, her pack torn from her shoulders, her GPS unit gone, disappeared into the white void above. For 30 seconds, Sarah couldn't breathe. The pain was so intense it paralyzed her lungs. When she finally gasped in air, it was so cold it felt like inhaling broken glass. She tried to move. Her left leg wouldn't respond. When she looked down, even through the pain-induced haze, she could see the wrong angle of her thigh. Compound fracture. The bone hadn't broken through the skin, but it was bad. Really bad. Sarah's training kicked in through the panic. Assess the situation. Stop the bleeding if there is any. Stabilize the injury. Find shelter. Signal for help. She wasn't bleeding externally, which was good, but she was trapped at the bottom of a ravine in a blizzard with a broken femur and no way to call for help. Her radio was smashed. She could see the broken pieces half buried in snow near her head. Her GPS was gone. Her emergency beacon had been in her pack, and she had no idea where the pack had landed. Shelter. She needed shelter immediately. Sarah dragged herself backward using her arms, biting down on her lips so hard she tasted blood, trying not to scream. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through her leg. She managed to pull herself under an overhang of rock that jutted from the ravine wall. It wasn't much, but it would block some of the wind. Her emergency kit was still clipped to her belt. With shaking hands, She pulled out the small thermal blanket, the kind that folds into a package the size of a deck of cards. She wrapped it around herself as best she could, but it was designed for temporary shelter, not surviving a Montana blizzard with sub-zero temperatures. Sarah knew the statistics. At 18 below zero with wind chill, hypothermia could set in within 30 minutes if you weren't properly insulated. She was properly insulated for moving, for generating body heat through activity. But lying still, injured, unable to move, her body temperature would drop fast. She had maybe 2 hours before she lost consciousness, maybe 4 before she froze to death. Sarah pulled out her father's old compass, the one she carried more for sentiment than navigation. The brass was cold enough to burn her skin, even through her gloves. She stared at it, thinking about Michael Chen, about the last thing he'd said to her before that final shift. The mountains don't care about us, Sarah. They're not cruel, but they're not kind either. They just are. It's up to us to respect them, to be smarter than they are dangerous. She hadn't been smart today. She'd been desperate to help, and desperation made you reckless. The wind shifted, and for just a moment, Sarah heard something. Not the storm, something else. A sound that didn't belong in this frozen wilderness. A howl. Long, mournful, rising and falling with an ancient cadence, that made something in Sarah's chest tighten. She knew that sound. Wolf. And it was close. Sarah's heart rate spiked, despite the cold already slowing her circulation. Wolves weren't typically dangerous to humans. In all her years working Glacier National Park, she'd never heard of an unprovoked wolf attack. But she also wasn't typically injured, immobile, and potentially smelling like prey. The howl came again, closer now. Then another voice joined it, and another. A pack. Sarah's hand moved to the bear spray on her belt, but her fingers were too numb to grip the canister properly. Even if she could use it, bear spray in this wind would probably blow back into her own face. She pressed herself harder against the rock wall, trying to make herself as small as possible, and waited. The first wolf appeared at the edge of the ravine, like a ghost materializing from the storm. Sarah's breath caught. It was white, pure white. Not the grey white of timber wolves she'd seen in the park, but white like fresh snow, like something from a dream or a story her father used to tell. The animal was massive, easily 120 pounds, with a broad chest and powerful shoulders built for bringing down elk. Its eyes, even at this distance, even in the failing light, glowed amber like dying embers. The white wolf stared down at her for what felt like an eternity. Sarah stared back, her hand still uselessly clutching at the bear spray canister. Then the wolf did something that made no sense. It began to descend into the ravine. The animal picked its way down the slope with careful deliberation, its massive paws finding purchase on patches of exposed rock that Sarah couldn't even see in the blowing snow. Within 2 minutes, the wolf stood at the bottom of the ravine, 20 feet away from where Sarah huddled under her inadequate shelter. This close, Sarah could see every detail. The wolf was male, scarred along his right shoulder with what looked like an old wound, maybe from a territorial fight or a hunting accident. His fur was thick with winter coat, and despite the storm, he seemed completely unbothered by the cold. The amber eyes studied her with an intelligence that felt uncomfortably human. Sarah didn't move, didn't breathe. This was it. This was how she died. Not from hypothermia, but torn apart by a predator while she was too broken to defend herself. The white wolf took 3 steps closer. Sarah's vision was starting to blur at the edges. Whether from pain or cold or fear, she couldn't tell. The wolf's breath fogged the air between them, and she could smell the wild musk of him, the scent of pine and snow and something ancient that had no name. Then the wolf laid down. Sarah blinked, certain she was hallucinating. But no. The enormous animal had settled onto the snow about 6 feet from her, positioned between Sarah and the worst of the wind. He laid his head on his paws and watched her with those amber eyes that seemed to glow with their own light. For a long moment, Sarah couldn't process what was happening. Then understanding began to dawn, impossible as it seemed. The wolf was blocking the wind. As if to confirm this, 2 more wolves appeared at the ravine's edge and descended with the same careful precision as the white alpha. These were smaller, greys with darker markings, clearly subordinate to the white male. They positioned themselves on either side of Sarah's shelter, creating a windbreak with their bodies. Sarah's medical training, the part of her brain still functioning despite the shock and cold, understood what was happening, even if she couldn't believe it. The wolves were using their bodies to create an insulated pocket around her. The wind, that had been steadily draining her body heat, was now being blocked by over 300 pounds of wolf. The temperature in Sarah's small shelter began to stabilize. It was still well below freezing, but the deadly wind chill factor had been eliminated. Why? Why would wolves do this? Sarah's vision swam as another wave of pain radiated from her broken leg. She was going into shock. She knew the signs. Her body's response to major trauma. Without treatment, shock could kill her as surely as the cold. The white wolf's head lifted. Those amber eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made Sarah forget about the pain for just a moment. Then the animal stood and moved closer. Sarah's hand tightened uselessly on the bear spray, but the wolf didn't attack. Instead, he laid down again, this time right next to her, his body pressed against her right side. The heat that radiated from him was like a furnace. Sarah could feel it even through her heavy winter gear, a blessed warmth that her hypothermic body desperately craved. Against every survival instinct, against everything she'd been taught about wild animals, Sarah leaned into that warmth. The wolf didn't move, didn't react, just lay there, solid and warm, while the blizzard raged above them. Sarah's shaking began to subside as her core temperature slowly climbed back towards sustainable levels. The pain in her leg was still excruciating, but the immediate threat of freezing to death had been pushed back, at least temporarily. She should be terrified. She was injured and alone with apex predators. But somehow, Sarah didn't feel afraid. She felt something else entirely. Something that made no logical sense, but felt true in her bones. She felt protected. Time became strange after that. Sarah would fade in and out of consciousness, the pain and shock pulling her under. Then the cold, or a shift in the wolves' positions, would bring her back. Each time she surfaced, the white wolf was there, pressed against her side, amber eyes watching her in the darkness. At some point, Sarah's hand moved without her conscious decision. Her numb fingers found the thick white fur of the wolf's neck and buried themselves there, seeking warmth and something else. Connection. Proof that this was real, that she wasn't alone. The wolf allowed it. Sarah's pain-fogged mind drifted back through the years. She was 8 years old, walking through these same mountains with her father. They'd been tracking a wolf pack for a research project. Her father had pointed to tracks in the snow, teaching her to identify the alpha by the size and spacing of the prints. "Wolves are family animals, Sarah," Michael Chen had said, his voice warm with the passion he felt for these mountains and everything in them. "They protect each other. They mourn their losses. They're not so different from us." Sarah had asked him if wolves ever helped people. Her father had smiled. "There are stories, old Native American legends about wolf spirits that guide lost travelers. Russian folktales about wolves raising human children. Are they true? I don't know. But I know wolves are smart. Smarter than most people give them credit for. And I know they can recognize when something needs help." At the time, Sarah had thought it was just her dad being romantic about the wildlife he loved. But now, lying broken in a ravine, with a white wolf providing the warmth keeping her alive, those words felt prophetic. The night deepened. The storm showed no signs of stopping. Sarah's consciousness continued its irregular rhythm of fading and returning. During one of her conscious moments, she noticed something that made her breath catch despite the pain. Around the white wolf's neck, barely visible beneath the thick fur, was a band of slightly darker skin. a line where something had rubbed consistently over time. A collar. This wolf had worn a collar. Sarah's mind struggled to make sense of this through the haze of shock and cold. A collar meant human contact. It meant this animal had a history with people, a connection that went deeper than wilderness encounters. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered through cracked lips. Her voice was barely audible, raspy from the cold and from not speaking for hours. "Where did you come from?" The white wolf's ear swiveled toward her voice, the only indication he'd heard. Those amber eyes stayed fixed on something in the darkness beyond the shelter, alert and watchful. Protecting her. Sarah's grip tightened slightly in the thick fur. "My dad," she managed to say, the words coming slowly. "Michael Chen. He was a ranger here. Long time ago, maybe. Maybe he—" She couldn't finish the thought. The pain was pulling her under again. But before the darkness took her, Sarah could have sworn the white wolf's body shifted, pressing closer, offering more warmth. And in that moment between consciousness and oblivion, a memory surfaced. 23 years ago, Sarah had been 5 years old. Her father had brought home a wolf pup, injured and orphaned. Against every regulation, he'd kept it in their garage for 2 weeks, nursing it back to health. Sarah remembered feeding it by hand, remembered those same amber eyes staring up at her with trust and need. The pup had been white, pure white, rare among the grey wolf populations of Montana. Her father had called him Ghost. When the pup was healthy enough, Michael Chen had driven deep into the backcountry and released him, giving the young wolf a chance at life his injury would have otherwise denied him. Sarah's eyes snapped open, her heart racing despite her weakened state. She stared at the massive animal pressed against her side, at the amber eyes now turned back to watch her face. "Ghost?" she breathed. "Is it? Are you—" The white wolf's tail moved, just once, a single, deliberate thump against the snow. Sarah's vision blurred with tears that froze on her cheeks almost instantly. It was impossible. That pup would be 23 years old now. Wolves didn't live that long in the wild. 10 to 12 years was typical. 15 was ancient. But Sarah had seen the scar on the wolf's shoulder, and she remembered Ghost had been caught in a trap, the same shoulder, torn and bleeding. Her father had spent hours carefully cleaning the wound, stitching it with hands gentle as a surgeon's. The scar matched. "You remember," Sarah said, the tears coming faster now. "You remember him. You remember us." The white wolf held her gaze for a long moment, then laid his head across her chest, heavy and warm and real. The other 2 wolves shifted closer, adding their warmth to the shelter. Sarah's broken body finally surrendered to exhaustion, but for the first time since falling into the ravine, she didn't feel the cold grip of fear. She felt her father's presence in the warm weight of the wolf against her chest. She felt the mountains themselves holding her, keeping her alive through the storm. Just before sleep took her, Sarah heard the white wolf's rumbling breath, steady as a heartbeat, and she thought about her father's words. The mountains don't care about us. They're not cruel, but they're not kind either. But maybe, just maybe, some debts got repaid. Some kindness returned across years and species. Some connections endured beyond logic and time. Sarah Chen closed her eyes and let the darkness take her, trusting that when morning came, if morning came, she wouldn't face it alone. Sarah woke to pain so intense it yanked her from unconsciousness like a fishhook in flesh. Her leg felt like someone was driving white-hot railroad spikes through the bone. She gasped, the sound strangled and harsh, and tried to move. Big mistake. The white wolf's head lifted immediately, those amber eyes alert and focused. The storm had quieted somewhat, the wind no longer screaming but still howling steadily above them. Grey dawn light filtered into the ravine, turning the snow a pale blue. Sarah's entire body was shaking now, but not from cold. Shock. Her medical training identified it even through the fog of agony. Her body was shutting down, conserving resources, preparing for the end. She'd seen it before in trauma patients. The shaking, the confusion, the way sounds became muffled and distant. She was dying. The thought came with strange clarity. Sarah Chen, 28 years old, would die in this ravine. They'd find her body in the spring thaw, if they found her at all. Her mother would bury another family member in the same cemetery where her father rested. The cycle of loss would continue. But then the white wolf stood, and everything changed. The massive animal moved to Sarah's broken leg with deliberate purpose. She tried to pull away, fresh terror spiking through her system despite everything that had happened during the night. What was he doing? Even a gentle bite could tear through muscle, could make her injury catastrophically worse. But Ghost didn't bite. Instead, he began to dig. His powerful paws moved with precision, clearing snow from around Sarah's injured leg, exposing it to the dim morning light. Then he did something that made Sarah's breath catch. He grabbed a fallen pine branch in his jaws, a thick piece about 3 feet long, and dragged it over to her leg. The other 2 wolves moved in, and Sarah watched in stunned disbelief as the 3 animals worked together. Ghost positioned the branch alongside her broken femur. The 2 greys used their bodies to brace it, holding the makeshift splint in place while Ghost packed snow around the whole thing, creating a frozen cast that immobilized the fracture. They were splinting her leg. Sarah's mind couldn't process what she was seeing. This wasn't instinct. This was problem-solving. This was understanding of trauma care that shouldn't be possible for wild animals. Unless they weren't entirely wild. When the wolves finished, Sarah's leg was stabilized, packed in snow and wood that would prevent further damage from movement. The pain was still excruciating, but the sharp, grinding sensation of bone fragments moving against each other had stopped. Ghost turned his attention to her next. He moved closer to Sarah's face, his breath warm against her frozen skin, and began to lick the ice from her face mask, her goggles, the areas where her exposed skin had begun to show the white patches of frostbite. The action was so tender, so deliberate, that Sarah started crying again. "Thank you," she whispered. "Ghost, thank you." The wolf paused, those amber eyes meeting hers, and Sarah saw something in them that made her chest tight. Recognition, memory, and something deeper that had no name but felt like family. Then Ghost threw his head back and howled. The sound echoed off the ravine walls, long and mournful and carrying. The 2 grey wolves joined in, their voices harmonizing with their alpha's call. Sarah understood. They were signaling, calling to the rest of the pack, or maybe calling for help in the only way they could. Within minutes, Sarah heard movement above. More wolves appeared at the ravine's edge, 4 of them, all greys except for one, with distinctive black markings across its face. They descended carefully, joining the others at the bottom. Ghost moved among them, touching noses, communicating in ways Sarah couldn't fully understand. Then, as if responding to commands, 3 of the new arrivals positioned themselves around Sarah, adding their body heat to the shelter, while Ghost and 2 others climbed back out of the ravine and disappeared into the storm. Sarah's heart sank. He was leaving. After everything, Ghost was abandoning her. But no, she had to trust. This animal had saved her life already. Whatever he was doing, there had to be a reason. The wolves left behind kept Sarah warm, their bodies creating a cocoon of heat that fought back the deadly cold. Time passed in a blur of pain and half-consciousness. Sarah drifted in and out, her body conserving energy, her mind wandering through memories. She remembered the day her father died. She'd been 23, fresh out of ranger training, so proud to follow in his footsteps. Michael Chen had gone out for a routine patrol and never came back. They'd found him 3 hours later, slumped against a pine tree, his hand pressed to his chest, his face peaceful. Massive coronary. The doctors said he probably didn't suffer, that it was quick. But Sarah had suffered. She'd spent 5 years carrying the weight of that loss, filling her father's boots, literally and figuratively, trying to be the ranger he'd been, trying to honor his memory. And now, 23 years after Michael Chen had saved a white wolf pup, that same wolf was trying to save his daughter. The symmetry was almost too perfect to believe. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by sounds from above. Voices, human voices calling through the storm. "Sarah! Sarah Chen!" Her heart leaped. The search and rescue team. They'd come looking for her. But how? Her radio was destroyed, her GPS lost, her emergency beacon missing with her pack. How could they possibly know where to find her? Sarah tried to call out, but her voice wouldn't cooperate. The cold had damaged her vocal cords, and all that emerged was a weak rasp that wouldn't carry 5 feet, let alone up and out of the ravine. The wolves around her stirred, ears pricked, alert. Then, as if responding to some unheard signal, they began to howl. All of them, their voices rising in a chorus that echoed across the mountains. The human voices stopped. Sarah heard confused shouting then. "Did you hear that? Wolves, multiple wolves, down in that ravine system. Why would wolves be howling during the day in a storm?" "I don't know, but it's the only lead we've got." Sarah's tracking beacon last pinged from this area before it went dead. So they had found her beacon. Her pack must have landed somewhere accessible enough for the signal to transmit before the battery died or the cold killed the electronics. The voices grew closer. Sarah could hear equipment, the crunch of snowshoes, the professional efficiency of a trained rescue team working in terrible conditions. The wolves around her remained calm, their howling subsiding now that they'd accomplished their goal. A face appeared at the ravine's edge. Tom Morrison, a ranger Sarah had worked with for 3 years. His eyes went wide behind his goggles. "Jesus Christ! Sarah! I've got her! She's in the ravine, and she's surrounded by wolves." More faces appeared. Sarah recognized Jake Patterson and Maria Gonzalez from the rescue team. They stared down at the scene below, at Sarah lying broken among 5 massive wolves who made no move to flee. "Are they attacking her?" Jake called down. Sarah managed to shake her head weakly. Tom was already setting up repelling equipment. "Everybody stay calm. Don't make any aggressive moves toward the wolves. Sarah, can you hear me? Are you injured?" Sarah nodded, then pointed to her splinted leg. "Okay, we're coming down. Nice and slow. If the wolves spook, you need to—" But Tom stopped talking as Ghost emerged from the tree line above, followed by his 2 companions. The white wolf carried something in his jaws. Sarah's emergency pack. The rescue team froze, watching in stunned silence as Ghost descended into the ravine with the pack, the other 2 wolves flanking him. He dropped the pack at Sarah's side, then turned to face the humans above with a calm authority that clearly communicated, "She's under our protection." "That's a white wolf," Maria whispered, her voice carrying in the cold air. "I've never seen a white wolf in Glacier. Not once in 12 years. Tom was staring at Ghost with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. Recognition? Impossible. Tom had only been working the park for 5 years. He couldn't know about Ghost, about what her father had done. But Tom's next words made Sarah's breath catch. "Michael's wolf," Tom said quietly. "The legendary white wolf. I thought it was just a story the old-timers told." "What are you talking about?" Jake demanded. Tom never took his eyes off Ghost. "Michael Chen saved a white wolf pup 20-something years ago, fed it by hand, nursed it back to health, released it into the wild. The other rangers said he was crazy, that a wolf couldn't survive with the injury it had. But Michael swore the pup would make it, said wolves were tougher than people thought, smarter than we gave them credit for." Tom's voice cracked slightly. He used to say that wolf would remember, that if Michael ever needed help out here, the wolf would come. "That's insane," Maria said. "That wolf would be dead by now. They don't live that long." "Look at it," Tom said simply. "Look at the scar on its right shoulder. Look at those amber eyes. That's Michael's wolf, or its offspring, or something. But that animal down there knows Sarah Chen, and it's been keeping her alive." The rescue team worked quickly after that, rappelling into the ravine with practiced efficiency. The wolves didn't retreat. They simply moved back a few feet, giving the humans space to work, but making it clear they weren't leaving. Tom reached Sarah first, dropping to his knees beside her. "Hey, Sarah, we've got you. You're going to be okay." "The family," Sarah croaked, her voice barely functional. "SUV, 2 kids. Did you find them?" Tom's expression softened. "We found them 6 hours ago. All safe, hypothermic but alive. They never left the vehicle, stayed put like they were supposed to. They're already at the hospital in Kalispell." He paused. "Sarah, you were looking for them in the wrong location. Your GPS coordinates were off. They were 3 miles south of where you were searching." Sarah closed her eyes, processing this. She'd nearly died trying to save people who'd already been rescued. The irony was almost funny. Maria moved in with medical equipment, checking Sarah's vitals with quick, professional movements. Pulse is weak, respiration's shallow. She's hypothermic and in shock. That leg needs immediate attention. How the hell did it get splinted? Everyone looked at Ghost. The white wolf sat calmly 10 feet away, watching the proceedings with those intelligent amber eyes, his pack arranged behind him like an honor guard. "No way," Jake muttered. "No way did wolves splint a broken bone." But there was the evidence, impossible to deny. The branch aligned perfectly with Sarah's femur, packed with snow that had frozen solid, immobilizing the fracture as effectively as any field splint. Tom caught Sarah's eye. She saw the questions there, the wonder and confusion, and something like awe. She managed a tiny nod toward Ghost. "He remembered," she whispered. "My dad. He remembered." Understanding dawned on Tom's face, and his eyes grew suspiciously bright. He turned to Ghost, and in a voice thick with emotion said, "Thank you. Whatever you are, wherever you came from, thank you for saving her." Ghost's tail moved. Once. The same deliberate thump Sarah had seen the night before. The rescue team worked for 40 minutes, stabilizing Sarah's leg properly, treating her frostbite, getting heated IV fluids into her to combat the hypothermia. They prepared a rescue litter, a specialized stretcher designed for evacuating injured people from wilderness areas. As they carefully moved Sarah onto the litter, securing her with straps, Ghost stood and approached. The rescue team tensed, but the white wolf's body language showed no aggression. He simply came close enough to touch his nose to Sarah's hand one final time. Sarah's fingers moved through his fur, memorizing the feel of it. "I'll come back," she promised. "When I'm healed, I'll come back and find you." Ghost held her gaze for a long moment. Then he turned and began climbing out of the ravine, his pack following. Within seconds, they disappeared into the pine forest, leaving only tracks that the falling snow would erase within the hour. The rescue took another 3 hours. The team had to haul Sarah up the ravine wall using a pulley system, then transport her 2 miles through the storm to where a snowmobile could access them. From there, it was another hour to the park entrance where an ambulance waited. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness during the journey, pumped full of pain medication that made everything soft and distant. But every time she surfaced, she thought about Ghost, about amber eyes in the darkness and warmth when she needed it most, about debts repaid across decades and species. The ambulance ride to Kalispell Regional Medical Center was a blur of sirens and concerned faces. Sarah was rushed into surgery, where orthopedic surgeons spent 6 hours reconstructing her shattered femur with plates and screws. The frostbite on her face and fingers was treated aggressively. The hypothermia had been caught before it caused permanent organ damage. She'd been lucky, impossibly lucky. The doctors said another hour in those conditions would have killed her. But Sarah knew it wasn't luck. She woke in a hospital room 2 days later, her mother sitting beside the bed. Lisa Chen looked older than Sarah remembered, her hair grayer, her face lined with worry. When she saw Sarah's eyes open, she started crying. "Baby," Lisa said, gripping Sarah's hand. "Oh, baby, we thought we'd lost you." Sarah's throat was raw from the breathing tube they'd used during surgery. "I'm okay, Mom, I'm here. They told me about the wolves." Lisa's voice shook. "About the white wolf. Sarah, do you think it could have been—" "It was him, Mom. It was Ghost, Dad's wolf. I know it sounds crazy, but it doesn't sound crazy. Lisa pulled something from her purse. A photograph, old and faded, protected in a plastic sleeve. Your father took this the day he released Ghost back into the wild. He never showed anyone, broke protocol by keeping it, but he couldn't help himself. Sarah stared at the photo. Her father, 20 years younger, kneeling in deep snow. Beside him, a white wolf pup with amber eyes, looking up at the camera. And on the pup's right shoulder, clearly visible, was a healing wound. The same scar Ghost bore now. Wolves don't live 23 years, Sarah whispered. No, her mother agreed. They don't. But your father always said Ghost was special, different. He said that Wolf had a spirit that wouldn't quit, that he'd survive anything because he understood what it meant to be saved, to be given a second chance. Lisa placed the photo in Sarah's hand. Maybe he passed that spirit down. Maybe Ghost had offspring, a white pup he taught everything to, including how to recognize the Chen family. Or maybe... She paused, looking out the window at the snow-covered mountains visible in the distance. Maybe some bonds are stronger than biology. Maybe some debts transcend the normal rules of life and death. Sarah clutched the photo, tears streaming down her face. Dad would have loved knowing Ghost saved me. Oh, baby, Lisa leaned forward, kissing Sarah's forehead. He does know. Wherever he is, he knows. And he's proud of you. Proud that you're brave enough to risk yourself for others, just like he taught you. Proud that the animal he saved proved him right about the goodness in all living things. Over the next week, as Sarah recovered in the hospital, the story exploded. News outlets picked it up. Ranger saved by wolf pack in Montana blizzard. Scientists were skeptical, calling it coincidence, saying the wolves were probably just seeking shelter and Sarah happened to be there. But the rescue team knew better. They'd seen the splinted leg, seen the way Ghost had brought Sarah's pack, seen the deliberate intelligence in those amber eyes. Donations poured into wolf conservation funds. The Park Service received thousands of letters supporting wolf protection. Sarah gave one interview from her hospital bed and ended it with a simple message. My father taught me that every life matters, that kindness creates ripples we can't always see. 23 years ago, he saved a white wolf's life, and last week, that wolf saved mine. We share this world with creatures more intelligent, more capable of emotion and memory than we often acknowledge. They deserve our respect, our protection, our gratitude. The interview went viral. Within days, it had been viewed over 20 million times. But for Sarah, none of that mattered as much as the moment, 2 weeks after the rescue, when she was finally discharged from the hospital. She stood in the parking lot, leaning heavily on crutches, her left leg encased in a complex brace that would remain for months. Her mother had brought her father's old Ranger jacket, the one she'd been wearing during the blizzard, cleaned and repaired. Sarah put it on, breathing in the faint scent of pine and mountain air still clinging to the fabric, and she looked toward the mountains, toward Glacier National Park's snow-covered peaks gleaming in the winter sun. Somewhere out there, Ghost was alive, leading his pack, surviving another winter, carrying the memory of 2 humans who'd treated him with kindness. I'll see you again, Sarah whispered to the mountains. I promise. And deep in the backcountry, in a den beneath ancient pines, a white wolf's ears pricked forward. He lifted his head, amber eyes turning toward the distant valley where humans lived, and something in his chest tightened with recognition. The connection endured, the debt was honored, and the story was far from over. 3 months passed before Sarah could walk without crutches. 3 months of grueling physical therapy, of metal pins holding her femur together, of learning to trust her leg again. The doctors said she was healing remarkably well, that she'd be cleared for light duty by summer if she continued her progress. But Sarah wasn't interested in light duty. She wanted to get back to the mountains, back to the wilderness where she belonged, back to where Ghost had saved her life. The story had taken on a life of its own in those 3 months. The viral video had attracted attention from wildlife documentarians, researchers, and even Hollywood producers wanting to make a movie about the Miracle Wolf. Sarah had turned them all down. This wasn't about fame or money, this was personal, sacred even. But one call she did take came from Dr. James Whitmore, a wolf biologist from the University of Montana who'd spent 40 years studying pack dynamics in the northern Rockies. He showed up at Sarah's apartment in Whitefish on a cold April morning, carrying a worn leather briefcase and an expression of barely contained excitement. "Miss Chen, thank you for seeing me," he said as Sarah let him in. He was in his late 60s, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that reminded her of her father. "I know you've been bombarded with requests, but I think you'll want to hear what I've discovered." Sarah gestured for him to sit at her small kitchen table. "Coffee?" "Please." Dr. Whitmore opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I've been studying the white wolf phenomenon for 23 years, ever since a ranger named Michael Chen reported releasing a white pup into the Glacier backcountry." Sarah's hand froze on the coffee pot. "You knew my father?" "I did. Michael contacted me after he found the pup, wanted to make sure he was doing everything right for its recovery. We stayed in touch over the years. He'd send me updates whenever he spotted the white wolf in the park. The last sighting he reported was about 6 months before he passed away." Dr. Whitmore's expression softened. "I was sorry to hear about his death. He was a good man, cared deeply about the wildlife he protected." Sarah poured the coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "What did you discover?" "Your father was right. The white wolf survived. But that's not the remarkable part." Dr. Whitmore spread photographs across the table. Trail camera images, blurry but unmistakable. A white wolf, massive and powerful, leading a pack. "I've been tracking this animal for over 2 decades. The white coat is a genetic mutation, extremely rare in grey wolf populations. But this wolf, Ghost as your father named him, he's been documented consistently in the Glacier area for 23 years. "That's impossible," Sarah said quietly. "Wolves don't live that long." "Exactly. The average lifespan in the wild is 10 to 12 years. 15 is exceptional. 23 is, well, it shouldn't exist." Dr. Whitmore pulled out more photos. "But the scar pattern matches across all these images. Same injury on the right shoulder. Same amber eye coloration, which is also rare. And look at this." He showed Sarah a photo from just 2 weeks ago. Ghost, clear as day, standing on a ridge with 6 other wolves. The white coat was slightly grayed with age, the muzzle showing silver. But the animal looked healthy, powerful, alive. "How?" Sarah whispered. "I don't know. I've sent tissue samples from sites where the pack has been to geneticists. The DNA analysis suggests this wolf has some unique markers, possibly related to longevity genes. But that's speculation. What I know for certain is that this animal has defied every statistical probability." Dr. Whitmore leaned forward. "And there's something else. The pack behavior. I've documented 17 instances over the years where Ghost's pack has interacted with humans in unusual ways." He showed her more trail camera footage. Ghost approaching a lost hiker, leading them back to a trail. Ghost's pack alerting rangers to a poacher's camp. Ghost standing between a mother grizzly and a family of campers until the humans could retreat safely. "This wolf doesn't just survive," Dr. Whitmore said. "He helps. It's unprecedented behavior, almost as if he's teaching his pack that humans can be allies, not just threats." Sarah stared at the images, her throat tight. "My father saved him, and Ghost has been returning the favor, again and again. That's my theory. Your father showed this animal that not all humans are dangerous, that kindness exists, and Ghost has been operating on that knowledge ever since." Dr. Whitmore gathered the photos. "Ms. Chen, I'd like your permission to continue this research, to properly document Ghost and his pack, not for exploitation, but for understanding. What this wolf represents could change how we think about animal intelligence, about memory and cross-species relationships." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "On one condition. Whatever you publish, Whatever research comes from this, the focus has to be on protection. Ghost and his pack need to remain safe. No trophy hunters, no people trying to capture them, no disruption to their territory. Agreed, absolutely. Dr. Whitmore extended his hand. You have my word. They shook on it, and Sarah felt something shift in her chest. This was right. This was how she could honor both her father and the wolf who'd saved her. Over the next 2 months, as Sarah continued her recovery, she worked with Dr. Whitmore to establish a protected research zone in the northern section of Glacier National Park. It took political maneuvering, meetings with park officials, and testimony before conservation boards. But Sarah's story, combined with Dr. Whitmore's decades of research, made a compelling case. By June, the Ghost Wolf Preservation Area was officially designated, 500 square miles of pristine wilderness where the white wolf's pack could live without human interference beyond monitoring. Sarah was cleared for full duty on June 15th. Her leg still ached in cold weather, and she'd carry a limp for the rest of her life. But she was whole, functional, ready. Her first day back, she requested assignment to the Northern Territories. Her supervisor, a weathered ranger named Bill Hutchins, who'd worked with her father, looked at her for a long moment before nodding. You're going looking for him, aren't you? Sarah didn't bother denying it. I promised I'd come back. Michael would be proud. Bill pulled out a map, marking several locations. Dr. Whitmore's cameras have tracked the pack in these areas over the past few weeks. If you're going to find Ghost, these are your best chances. Sarah took the map, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her father's old jacket. Thank you, Bill. Sarah. He stopped her at the door. Be careful out there. You've got nothing left to prove. Not to me, not to your dad's memory, not to anyone. I'm not trying to prove anything, Sarah said softly. I'm trying to say thank you. She headed into the backcountry the next morning, her pack lighter than usual due to her still healing leg, but containing everything she needed for a 3-day solo patrol. The June weather was perfect, the mountains alive with summer growth. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and the sound of running water echoed through the valleys as snowmelt fed the streams. Sarah hiked for 6 hours, following elk trails and game paths, moving deeper into the preservation area. She made camp near a small lake, the water so clear she could see trout moving in the depths. As the sun set and the mountains turned gold and purple, she built a small fire and sat watching the flames. I'm here, Ghost, she said aloud, her voice carrying across the still water. I don't know if you can hear me, or if you even remember, but I'm here, and I wanted you to know that you didn't just save my life. You changed it. You reminded me why my father loved these mountains, why he dedicated his life to protecting animals like you. Only the crackling fire answered her. Sarah slept that night under a ceiling of stars so bright they looked close enough to touch. She dreamed of running through snow on 4 legs, of hunting with a pack, of amber eyes watching over her while she slept. She woke to dawn light filtering through her tent and the sound of something moving outside. Sarah froze, listening. Footsteps, heavy, circling her camp. Her hand moved slowly to the bear spray beside her sleeping bag. Then, a sound made her heart stop. A wolf's chuff. Low and questioning. Sarah unzipped her tent with shaking hands and looked out. Ghost stood 20 feet away. In the morning light, he was even more magnificent than she remembered. The white coat, slightly grizzled now with age, gleamed like fresh snow. The amber eyes held that same impossible intelligence, and on his right shoulder, the scar from 23 years ago. Behind him, 6 other wolves waited. The pack. Sarah recognized 2 of the greys from the blizzard, now full adults. The others were younger, probably Ghost's offspring or grand offspring, carrying on his legacy. Hi, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. I told you I'd come back. Ghost took 3 steps closer, then 3 more. He moved with the deliberation of an animal who'd made a choice, who knew exactly what he was doing. Within moments, he stood directly in front of Sarah's tent, close enough that she could have reached out and touched him. She didn't move, didn't breathe. This had to be Ghost's decision. The white wolf studied her face for a long moment. Then, slowly, he lowered his head and pressed his muzzle against her hand. Sarah's control shattered. She buried her fingers in his thick fur and cried, "Thank you. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for remembering my dad. Thank you for being exactly what he always believed you were." Ghost stood perfectly still, allowing the contact, his body warm and solid and real. The rest of the pack moved closer, curious but not threatening. One of the younger wolves, a female with distinctive silver markings, came close enough to sniff Sarah's hair. They stayed like that for several minutes, woman and wolves, connected by something deeper than species or language. Finally, Sarah pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I can't keep you here. You're wild. You belong out there, living free. But I want you to know, there's a protected area now. 500 square miles where you and your pack will be safe. No hunting, no trapping, no interference. Dr. Whitmore is documenting your behavior but from a distance, and I'll be patrolling these territories, making sure you stay protected." Ghost's tail swished once. That same deliberate movement she'd seen before. Understanding. Acknowledgement. Then something unexpected happened. Ghost turned and walked toward the tree line, but after a few steps he stopped and looked back at Sarah. His meaning was clear. "Follow me." Sarah's training screamed at her that this was dangerous, that following a wolf pack into dense forest was insane. But something stronger than training, something that lived in the part of her that had inherited her father's love for these mountains, made her stand up. "Okay," she said. "I'll follow." Ghost led her deep into the forest, the pack moving around her in a loose formation that felt protective rather than predatory. They walked for over an hour, climbing higher into the mountains, until they reached a rocky outcropping that overlooked a hidden valley. And there, in the valley below, Sarah saw something that made her breath catch. A den. Not just any den, but a nursery. 3 wolf pups, barely old enough to venture outside, tumbled over each other in the entrance, their fur still fluffy with youth. 2 were grey, but 1 was pure white. Ghost had brought her to meet his family, his legacy. The silver-marked female from earlier descended into the valley, and the pups immediately ran to her. The mother. Ghost's mate, Sarah realized, and one of their pups carried his rare white coat, ensuring that even after Ghost's impossible life eventually ended, there would be another white wolf in these mountains. Sarah sat down on the rocks, overwhelmed. "You're showing me that it continues, that what my father started, what you've protected, it goes on." Ghost settled beside her, and together they watched the pups play in the late morning sun. The rest of the pack lounged nearby, relaxed and content. For a moment, Sarah felt transported out of time. This could have been a scene from 10,000 years ago, before humans and wolves became separate, when they ran together and protected each other. "My father would have loved this," Sarah said quietly. "Seeing you here, healthy and strong, seeing your family, knowing that his choice to save you mattered." Ghost's head turned toward her, and in those amber eyes, Sarah saw what she needed to see. The connection wasn't just between her father and Ghost. It extended to her now. She was part of this story, this relationship that transcended the normal boundaries between human and wild. They sat together for another hour before Ghost stood, signaling it was time to go. Sarah followed him back through the forest to her camp, the pack moving with them like an honor guard. When they reached her tent, Ghost paused one final time. Sarah knelt down so she was eye level with him. "I'll keep my promise. I'll protect this place, protect you and your family, for as long as I can." Ghost stepped forward and touched his nose to her forehead. A benediction, a blessing. Then he turned and loped into the forest, his pack flowing after him like water. Within seconds, they'd vanished into the shadows between the trees. But Sarah could still feel the warmth of his touch on her skin. She broke camp and hiked back to the ranger station, arriving as sunset painted the mountains in shades of crimson and gold. Bill Hutchins was waiting on the porch, and one look at Sarah's face told him everything. "You found him." "I found him. And Bill, he's got pups. One of them is white. The legacy continues." Bill smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Michael always said Ghost was special. Guess he was right about that too." That night, Sarah filed her patrol report. She documented the pack's location, noted the healthy pup population, and recommended continued protection for the area. But she left out the personal details. Those were hers, sacred moments that belonged to her and Ghost and the memory of her father. Over the following months, Sarah fell into a rhythm. She patrolled the Northern Territories regularly, occasionally crossing paths with Ghost's pack. Sometimes it was just distant glimpses, wolves moving through the forest like liquid shadow. Other times, Ghost would approach, allowing brief contact before returning to his wild life. Dr. Whitmore's research progressed. He published papers on Ghost's unprecedented longevity, on the pack's unusual cooperation with humans, on the implications for wolf conservation. The work gained international attention, and funding poured in for wildlife protection across the northern Rockies. The white pup grew strong and bold, learning from Ghost how to lead, how to hunt, how to survive. Tourists began requesting permits to photograph wolves in the preservation area, generating revenue that supported conservation efforts. But strict rules kept human interference to a minimum. No approaching the wolves, no feeding, no disruption. Sarah enforced those rules with fierce dedication. This was Ghost's territory, his sanctuary. She'd protected with everything she had. 1 year after her rescue, on a cold November evening, Sarah received a call from Dr. Whitmore. His voice was shaking. "Sarah, you need to see this. Can you come to my office?" She drove to the university, her stomach tight with worry. Dr. Whitmore met her at the door, his face pale. "I got the DNA results back from the latest tissue samples." "Sarah, Ghost's genetic markers are extraordinary. The longevity genes we identified, they're not just unusual, they're unprecedented. If we could understand them, apply them to conservation efforts for endangered wolf populations." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Ghost might hold the key to saving his entire species. But to do that properly, we'd need more invasive samples. We'd need to—" He trailed off, seeing Sarah's expression. "No," she said flatly. "Absolutely not. Ghost stays wild. He's not a research subject to be captured and studied. He's a living being who deserves his freedom." "But think about what we could learn, what we could preserve." "I am thinking about it, and the answer is no." Sarah's voice was steel. "My father saved Ghost's life by respecting what he was, a wild animal who deserved a chance. I'm not going to dishonor that by turning him into a lab specimen. Your research continues from a distance, or it doesn't continue at all." Dr. Whitmore stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You're right. I'm sorry. I got caught up in the science and forgot the ethics. Ghost stays wild. We observe, we document, but we don't interfere." "Thank you," Sarah said, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. As she drove home through the darkness, snow beginning to fall in the first storm of winter, Sarah thought about the choice her father had made 23 years ago. He could have kept Ghost, studied him, turned him over to researchers. But Michael Chen had chosen freedom, had chosen to trust that the wolf would survive, that kindness mattered more than knowledge. And that choice had rippled forward through time, saving Sarah's life, protecting an entire pack, creating a legacy that would endure. The snow fell heavier now, coating the mountains in white. Sarah pulled over at a scenic overlook, the same place her father used to take her when she was young. She got out of her truck and stood in the falling snow, looking toward the dark shapes of the mountains. And there, in the distance, she heard it. A howl. Long and mournful and achingly beautiful. Ghost's voice, calling across the wilderness. Sarah closed her eyes and listened, and she swore she could feel her father standing beside her, his hand on her shoulder, proud of the woman she'd become and the choices she'd made. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered to the snow and the darkness and the mountains, "for teaching me what really matters." The howl came again, and this time Sarah heard other voices join it. The pack, singing together in the winter night. A family, safe and free and wild. Exactly as it should be. 2 years had passed since that November night when Sarah heard ghosts howl echo across the mountains. 2 years of patrolling the preservation area, of occasional encounters with the white wolf and his pack, of watching the young white pup grow into a powerful yearling who moved with his father's same confident grace. Sarah was 31 now, promoted to senior ranger for the Northern Territories. The limp from her broken femur had faded to barely noticeable, though cold weather still brought aches that reminded her of that night in the ravine. She wore the discomfort like a badge of honor. Pain was proof she'd survived, proof that Ghost had saved her. The preservation area had become a model for wolf conservation across North America. Dr. Whitmore's non-invasive research had revealed insights into pack dynamics, hunting strategies, and wolf intelligence that were revolutionizing wildlife biology. Ghost's pack had grown to 11 members, one of the largest and most stable in the region. But on a frozen February morning, everything changed. Sarah was in her office at the ranger station when Bill Hutchins burst through the door, his face ashen. "We've got a situation. Multiple reports of gunshots in the preservation area, near Cathedral Ridge." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "That's where Ghost's den is." "I know. Sarah, there's more. A trophy hunter from Texas filed permits 6 months ago, before the preservation boundaries were finalized. Legal loophole. His permit's technically still valid for the old territory limits, which included a section of Cathedral Ridge." "What?" Sarah was already grabbing her gear, her hands shaking with rage and fear. Why wasn't this caught? Why wasn't he notified about the boundary changes? He was. Multiple times. But his lawyer claims the permits supersede the new regulations. They've got an injunction preventing us from stopping the hunt until it goes before a judge next week. Bill's voice was thick with fury. "Sarah, this guy is specifically hunting for a white wolf. He's been posting about it on social media, bragging about bagging the legendary ghost wolf of Glacier." Sarah felt something dark and primal surge through her chest. "How long ago were the shots?" 20 minutes. I've got 3 other rangers heading that way, but you know that terrain better than anyone." Sarah was out the door before he finished speaking. She jumped into her truck, throwing it into gear and roaring toward the northern access road. Her radio crackled with reports from the other rangers. More gunshots, wolf howls, confusion and chaos in the preserve that had been peaceful for 2 years. The drive took 45 minutes over snow-packed roads. Every second felt like an hour. Sarah's mind raced with terrible images. Ghost, bleeding in the snow. The pack scattered. The young white wolf, barely 2 years old, orphaned the way Ghost had been. She abandoned her truck at the trailhead and went the rest of the way on snowshoes, moving as fast as the deep powder allowed. Her radio had gone silent, which either meant the other rangers hadn't reached the area yet, or they'd lost signal in the heavy timber. Sarah was alone again, just like that night in the blizzard. She crested a ridge and heard voices below. Male, arguing. She dropped low and moved carefully through the trees until she had a vantage point. 3 men stood in a clearing. Trophy hunters, obvious from their expensive gear and high-powered rifles. The man in the center was tall and heavy-set, probably in his 50s, wearing camouflage that cost more than Sarah made in a month. He was gesturing angrily at the other 2. "I hit him! I know I hit him! There was blood in the snow!" "Mr. Dalton, we need to track it now before the trail goes cold," one of the others said. Dalton. Sarah's jaw clenched. Marcus Dalton, oil millionaire from Houston, known in hunting circles for collecting rare game. He had a private estate filled with taxidermied animals from 6 continents, and now he wanted Ghost. Sarah keyed her radio, keeping her voice low. "This is Ranger Chen. I've located the hunters at Cathedral Ridge, grid reference November 7-3, requesting immediate backup and law enforcement. Possible wounded wolf." Static answered her. The mountains were blocking her signal. She was on her own. Sarah moved closer, trying to assess the situation. Then she saw it. Blood in the snow, leading away from the clearing into dense timber. A wolf's tracks, the gait uneven, injured. Her heart shattered. Ghost was wounded. The hunters were preparing to follow the blood trail. Sarah knew she had minutes at most to intervene before they found and finished what they'd started. But she was one person against 3 armed men who'd already proven they didn't care about laws or ethics. She needed a different approach. Sarah stood up and walked into the clearing, her hand resting on her sidearm. "Gentlemen, this is a restricted area. You need to leave. Now." All 3 men spun around. Dalton's face flushed red. "We have permits, sweetheart. Legal permits. You can't stop us." "Those permits are under legal review. Hunting in this area is suspended, pending court decision." "The injunction says otherwise." Dalton pulled a folded document from his jacket. "Judge Morrison granted us continued access until the hearing. So, unless you want to be charged with interfering with a legal hunt, I suggest you step aside." Sarah's mind raced. She knew the law. Dalton was technically right. The injunction did protect him, at least for now. If she physically prevented him from hunting, she'd be the one breaking the law. But she also knew something Dalton didn't. The preservation area had emergency closure authority if an endangered species was present. And while grey wolves weren't endangered, their rare white genetic variant could arguably qualify under special circumstances. It was a reach. A huge reach that might cost Sarah her job, but she didn't hesitate. "This area is now under emergency closure due to the presence of a genetically rare specimen vital to ongoing research. Federal authority supersedes your permits. You have 10 minutes to clear out before I call in federal wildlife agents." Dalton's face turned purple. "You can't do that. Do you know who I am? Do you know how much money I've spent on this hunt? I don't care if you're the president. You're in violation of federal wildlife protection statutes. Leave. Now." One of Dalton's companions, a guide by the look of him, touched his arm. "Mr. Dalton, maybe we should—" "No," Dalton shook him off. "I paid $75,000 for this hunt. I've waited 2 years. I am not leaving without that white wolf." He raised his rifle, not pointing it at Sarah but making the threat clear. "You're going to step aside, Ranger, or we're going to have a problem." Sarah's hand moved to her sidearm. "Sir, if you point that weapon anywhere near me, I will respond with appropriate force. Lower the rifle." The tension in the clearing ratcheted to a breaking point. The 2 companions were backing away, clearly not wanting any part of what was about to happen. Dalton stood his ground, rifle raised, his expression twisted with entitlement and rage. Then the forest erupted. Wolves poured from the tree line, not just 1 or 2, but the entire pack. 11 massive animals moving with coordinated precision, forming a semicircle between Dalton and the blood trail. They didn't attack, didn't show aggression. They simply stood there, a living wall of fur and muscle and amber eyes. And at the center of the pack, limping but alive, was Ghost. Sarah's breath caught. The white wolf had been shot in his left hind leg, blood matting his fur, but he was standing, moving. His amber eyes fixed on Dalton with an intensity that made the hunter take an involuntary step backward. "Jesus Christ," one of the companions whispered. "There's so many of them." Ghost took a step forward, and the pack moved with him, perfectly synchronized, utterly calm, but radiating a power that needed no bared teeth or growls to communicate. This was their territory, their family, and they would defend it. Dalton's rifle shook in his hands. Get back, or I'll shoot." "Lower your weapon," Sarah said, her voice deadly quiet. "You fire that rifle, and I guarantee these wolves will respond. You'll be lucky if you make it out of here alive." "They're just animals. They'll run if I—" Ghost howled. The sound echoed off the mountains, primal and fierce and ancient. The rest of the pack joined in, their voices rising in a chorus that seemed to shake the very ground. It wasn't a threat, it was a declaration. "This is ours. You are not welcome here." Dalton's courage broke. He lowered the rifle, hands trembling. "We're leaving. We're leaving right now." "Smart choice," Sarah said. "And Mr. Dalton, if you ever set foot in this preserve again, I will personally ensure you face every federal charge I can think of. Understood?" Dalton nodded, his face pale. He and his companions backed away slowly, then turned and half ran toward their own trail out. Within minutes, they disappeared into the forest. The wolves held their position until the sounds of the hunters' retreat had faded completely. Then, as if responding to an unspoken signal, the pack dispersed. Most melted back into the trees, returning to whatever they'd been doing before the crisis. Only Ghost remained, along with the young white wolf who was nearly his size now. Sarah approached slowly, her heart in her throat. "Ghost, let me see." The white wolf stood still as Sarah knelt in the snow beside him. The bullet had grazed his left hind leg, tearing through muscle but missing the bone. It was bleeding heavily but not arterial. Survivable if it didn't get infected. "I need to treat this," Sarah said softly. "I need to clean it, stop the bleeding. Will you let me?" Ghost's amber eyes met hers. A long moment passed. Then, slowly, he lowered himself to the snow, exposing the wound. Sarah pulled her emergency medical kit from her pack, her hands shaking not from cold, but from the enormity of what was happening. Ghost was allowing her to help him, was trusting her the way he'd trusted her father 25 years ago. She worked quickly and carefully, cleaning the wound with antiseptic, packing it with clotting agent, wrapping it with sterile bandages. The white wolf flinched once when the antiseptic burned, but otherwise remained perfectly still. The young white wolf watched from a few feet away, his amber eyes tracking Sarah's every movement. Learning, understanding that his father trusted this human, that she could be trusted too. When Sarah finished, she sat back on her heels. "That's the best I can do out here. The wound should heal if you keep it clean. Try not to run on it for a few days." Ghost stood, testing the leg. He limped badly, but the bandage held. He looked at Sarah for a long moment, then did something that made her heart stop. He bowed his head and pressed his muzzle into her hand, just as he'd done that night in the ravine 2 years ago. A gesture of trust, of gratitude, of connection that transcended species. Sarah wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his white fur. "I won't let them hurt you. Any of you. I promise. Whatever it takes." Ghost held still for the embrace, then gently pulled away. He touched noses with the young white wolf, a clear message of introduction. Then he turned and limped into the forest, the young wolf following. But before they disappeared, the yearling looked back at Sarah, and in those amber eyes, so like his father's, she saw the future. When Ghost's impossible life finally ended, this young wolf would carry on, would remember, would maintain the connection between his pack and the humans who'd chosen protection over exploitation. The legacy would continue. Sarah hiked back to her truck in a daze, her mind reeling. When she finally got within radio range, her handset exploded with chatter. The other rangers had arrived at Cathedral Ridge to find the hunters fleeing. Federal wildlife agents had been called. The injunction was being challenged in emergency court proceedings. By the time Sarah reached the ranger station, it was nearly dark. Bill Hutchins met her at the door with news that made her knees weak with relief. Judge Morrison reversed the injunction. Dalton's permits are officially voided. The preservation area boundaries are upheld and expanded. And there's more. The incident got national attention. Major conservation groups are pledging funding to ensure this never happens again. We're talking millions of dollars, Sarah. Enough to protect not just Ghost's pack, but wolf populations across the entire northern Rockies. Sarah sagged against her truck, overwhelmed. Ghost was shot. I treated him in the field. He'll survive, but Bill. I know. I heard your radio report when you got back in range. Bill's expression was grave. You declared an emergency closure without proper authority. You threatened a hunter with federal charges that may not actually apply. Technically, you violated about 6 different protocols. Sarah's stomach sank. I know. I'll submit my resignation. The hell you will. Bill's voice was fierce. You protected an invaluable research subject and prevented what would have been a PR nightmare for the Park Service. The regional director called personally to commend your actions. You're not going anywhere, Chen. In fact, they're creating a new position, Special Wolf Conservation Officer. It's yours if you want it. Sarah couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was hearing. Your father would be proud, Bill said quietly. He always said you had the heart of a true ranger. Turns out he was right about that too. That night, Sarah drove to the overlook where she'd heard ghosts howl 2 years ago. She stood in the falling snow, looking toward the dark mountains. And she did hear it. Wolves howling in the distance. The pack, safe and together, singing their survival into the winter night. And mixed in with the chorus, she heard 2 voices that rang clearer than the rest. Ghost and his son, the next generation of white wolves who would carry the story forward. Sarah pulled out her phone and called her mother. Hi, baby, Lisa Chen answered. Everything okay? Mom, can you tell me the story again? About the day Dad found Ghost? There was a pause. Then Lisa's voice came back, warm with memory. He was on patrol near Cathedral Ridge. Late November, snow just starting. He heard crying, found the pup caught in a trap. The baby was so small, so scared. Your father spent 3 hours carefully freeing him, talking to him the whole time. You're going to be okay, little ghost. I've got you. You're safe now. Sarah closed her eyes, seeing it play out. Her father, kneeling in the snow, saving a life that would one day save hers. That pup shouldn't have survived, Lisa continued. Everyone told Michael he was wasting his time, that a wolf with those injuries would never make it. But your father believed. He said that Wolf had a spirit that wouldn't quit. He was right, Sarah whispered. God, Mom, he was so right. She stayed on the phone with her mother for an hour, sharing everything that had happened. The hunters, the confrontation, treating Ghost's wound, the young white wolf who would carry on. When they finally said goodbye, Sarah remained at the overlook, watching stars emerge between clouds. She thought about cycles and legacies, about kindness creating ripples that spread across decades. 25 years ago, her father had made a choice. To help instead of ignore. To see an injured animal as a life worth saving, rather than nature taking its course. That choice had saved Sarah's life 2 years ago, had led to the creation of a preservation area, protecting hundreds of animals, had sparked a conservation movement that would protect wolves for generations. All because Michael Chen had seen a suffering creature and decided to care. Sarah pulled her father's old compass from her pocket, the brass worn smooth from years of handling. She opened it, watching the needle swing toward magnetic north, toward the mountains, toward Ghost. I'll keep protecting them, Dad, she said to the stars and the snow, and the memory of the man who taught her everything that mattered. For as long as I live, I'll make sure Ghost and his family stay safe, that your legacy continues. The wind carried wolf song down from the high country, and Sarah smiled through her tears. Some debts could never be fully repaid. Some connections transcended the boundaries of species and time. Some stories were bigger than the individuals who lived them. This was one of those stories, and it was far from over. 5 years later, Sarah Chen stood at the edge of Cathedral Ridge, now 36, and recently married to another ranger who shared her passion for wildlife protection. In her arms, she held her 3-month-old daughter, Emma, wrapped in blankets against the cold. There, Sarah whispered, pointing toward the tree line. See him, baby? That's Ghost. And that's Frost, his son. They're the reason you exist. The reason Mommy's still here. 2 white wolves stood at the forest's edge, watching the human with the infant. Ghost was old now, his muzzle grey, his movements slower. but his amber eyes still gleamed with that impossible intelligence. And beside him, Frost stood in his prime, magnificent and powerful, ready to lead when his father's time came. Ghost had defied every biological law, living to an age no wild wolf should reach. But Dr. Whitmore believed the end was coming soon. The white wolf's body was finally surrendering to time. As if sensing Sarah's thoughts, Ghost took a step forward, then another. Frost moved with him, protective but trusting his father's judgment. They approached to within 10 feet, closer than they'd come in years. Ghost's eyes fixed on the baby in Sarah's arms, and something passed through his gaze. Recognition of the cycle, understanding that life continued, generation after generation. Sarah knelt carefully, bringing baby Emma down to Ghost's level. "This is Emma. Emma Chen. She's named after my grandmother, but we call her Emmy. And someday, when she's old enough, I'll tell her the story. About a ranger who saved a white wolf. About how that wolf saved his daughter. About how kindness creates ripples that never end." Ghost stepped closer, so close Sarah could feel his breath. The old wolf looked at the baby, and Emmy's eyes, bright and curious, looked back. For a moment, human infant and ancient wolf regarded each other across the gulf that separated their species. Then, Ghost did something Sarah had never seen him do before. He touched his nose gently to Emmy's tiny hand, a blessing from one generation to the next. Frost watched this exchange, learning, understanding that this human family was pack, was protected, was sacred. Then Ghost stepped back. He held Sarah's gaze one final time, and in those amber eyes she saw everything. Gratitude, respect, love in a form that needed no words. The white wolf turned and walked into the forest, Frost at his side. They disappeared into the trees like snow melting into light, leaving only tracks that the wind would eventually erase. But the connection would endure. The story would continue. And when Ghost's time finally came, when the legendary white wolf of Glacier National Park closed his eyes for the last time, he would do so knowing that his life had mattered, that the debt had been honored, that the kindness of one man had created a legacy spanning generations. Sarah held her daughter close and watched the empty tree line. "Thank you, Ghost," she whispered, "for everything, for my life, for showing us that different species can protect each other, for proving my father right about everything that matters." The wind carried her words into the mountains, into the wild places where wolves still ran free and stories became legend. And somewhere in the high country, a white wolf howled one last time, the sound echoing across the peaks like a promise. The connection endured, the legacy continued, and love, in all its forms, transcended everything.